Know your place, you worthless maid. Yes, Miss Sterling, the maid whispered, her voice shaking. Through the door, the millionaire heard the humiliation. Heard his fiancée break someone who worked under his roof. What he did next set the entire city on fire. Welcome back, my family and friends. I have missed you all so much. Thank you for sticking around with me. I truly appreciate your love and support. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to click the subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's continue. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Hartwell mansion as Marcus Hartwell adjusted his platinum cufflinks one final time. Tonight wasn't just another charity gala. It was the night he would announce his engagement to Victoria Sterling, the woman who had captured Manhattan's elite society with her beauty and grace. The weight of his grandmother's vintage Cartier ring pressed against his chest pocket, a reminder of the tradition he was about to honor. But something felt wrong. Marcus paused at the top of the grand staircase, his hand gripping the mahogany banister as an unsettling sensation crawled up his spine. The mansion, usually filled with the gentle hum of preparation, seemed to hold an unusual tension tonight. The staff moved with hurried, nervous energy, their eyes avoiding his gaze when he passed. Even Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper who had practically raised him after his parents' death, seemed unusually quiet during their morning briefing. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the opulent foyer below, where servers in crisp black uniforms arranged champagne flutes on silver trays. Everything looked perfect, too perfect, perhaps. Marcus had built his empire on reading people, on sensing the subtle undercurrents that others missed. It's what made him a billionaire by 35. But tonight, that same instinct was screaming that something was terribly amiss in his own home. Mr. Hartwell? The soft voice belonged to Grace Williams, the newest addition to his household staff. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of professionalism and something else. Was it fear? Grace had been working for him for only 3 months, but her dedication and quiet strength had already made her indispensable. She managed his home with an efficiency that impressed even his demanding standards. Yes, Grace? Marcus descended the stairs, noting how she seemed to shrink back slightly as he approached. This wasn't like her at all. Miss Sterling has arrived early. She's in the blue sitting room with some of her friends, going over the final preparations for tonight's announcement. Grace's voice was steady, but Marcus caught the slight tremor in her hands as she clasped them behind her back. Thank you. And Grace? He paused, studying her face. Is everything all right? You seem troubled. For a moment, something flickered across her features, a shadow of pain, perhaps anger. But it was gone so quickly Marcus almost thought he'd imagined it. Everything is perfect, Mr. Hartwell. Exactly as Ms. Sterling requested. The way she said Victoria's name sent another chill through him. There was a careful neutrality in her tone that spoke volumes about what she wasn't saying. Marcus had learned long ago that the most important conversations were often the ones that never happened, the truths hidden in the spaces between words. As Grace turned to leave, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Just below the collar of her crisp white shirt, barely visible, was the edge of what looked like a bruise. Dark purple against her brown skin, it seemed fresh, maybe a day or 2 old at most. Grace, wait. She froze, her shoulders tensing. Sir, how did you hurt yourself? His voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath. Marcus Hartwell hadn't built an empire by ignoring red flags. I'm naturally clumsy, Mr. Hartwell. Just bumped into something while cleaning. The lie came too quickly, too practiced. Grace had been many things in the months she'd worked for him, but clumsy wasn't one of them. She moved through his home like a dancer, efficient and graceful in everything she did. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of laughter echoed from the direction of the blue sitting room. Victoria's voice, bright and melodious, carried across the foyer along with the tittering of her social circle. But there was something in that laughter that didn't sit right with him, a sharp edge that he'd never noticed before, or perhaps had chosen not to notice. Mr. Hartwell? Grace's voice pulled him back to the present. Will there be anything else? He wanted to push, to demand the truth about that bruise, about the fear he saw in her eyes. But the rational part of his mind, the part that had learned to compartmentalize emotions in favor of logic, reminded him that tonight was about his future with Victoria. Whatever was troubling Grace could be addressed later. No, that's all. Thank you, Grace. As she disappeared toward the kitchen, Marcus found himself standing alone in the foyer, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt suffocating. The mansion that had been his sanctuary, his fortress against the world, now seemed like a stage set for a play he didn't understand. Every shadow held secrets. Every silence carried weight. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 5 o'clock, its deep resonance echoing through the halls. In 3 hours, 200 of New York's most influential people would fill these rooms. In 3 hours, he would slip his grandmother's ring onto Victoria's finger and bind their futures together. In 3 hours, he would take the next step toward the life he'd always been expected to live. So why did it feel like he was walking toward the edge of a cliff? Marcus straightened his tie and walked toward the blue sitting room, each step on the marble floor sounding like a countdown. Whatever secrets his home was hiding, whatever truth Grace was protecting, he would face it. After all, he was Marcus Hartwell. He'd built an empire on uncomfortable truths. But as he reached for the door handle, Victoria's voice drifted through the wood, and the words he heard would change everything he thought he knew about the woman he was planning to marry. What do you think is really going on in the Hartwell mansion? Have you ever had that gut feeling that something wasn't right, even when everything looked perfect on the surface? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes our instincts know things our minds haven't figured out yet. Marcus hesitated outside the blue sitting room, his hand frozen on the ornate brass handle. Victoria's voice carried through the heavy oak door, but it wasn't the loving tone he'd grown accustomed to during their 18-month courtship. There was something else there, something cold and cutting that made his chest tighten with unease. Honestly, I don't know why Marcus insists on keeping so many of them around. Half the staff could be replaced with more suitable people. Victoria's laugh tinkled like broken glass. But don't worry, once we're married, things will change dramatically around here. Marcus frowned. Victoria had never expressed concerns about his staff before. In fact, she'd often complimented him on how well-run his household was, how professional and efficient everyone seemed. What has changed? Oh, Victoria, you're terrible, came another voice, Priscilla Worthington, if Marcus wasn't mistaken. But you're absolutely right. I mean, standards must be maintained. Exactly. And speaking of standards, Victoria's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, but Marcus could still hear every word through the door. Did you see how that new girl, Grace, looked at Marcus during the Henderson retirement party last month? Like she thought she belonged in the same room as us. The audacity. Marcus's blood chilled. Grace had worked the Henderson party flawlessly, managing every detail with quiet professionalism. He remembered being impressed by how seamlessly she'd handled the logistics while remaining nearly invisible to the guests, exactly as a good staff member should. But Victoria had apparently been watching something else entirely. What did you do? Asked a third voice, breathless with anticipation. Oh, I made sure she understood her place. Some people need reminding that there's a natural order to things, and crossing those lines has consequences. Victoria's voice carried a satisfaction that made Marcus's skin crawl. She's much more compliant now. Aren't you, sweetheart? The last words weren't directed at her friends, and Marcus realized with growing horror that Grace must be in the room. His hand tightened on the door handle as silence stretched, broken only by muffled giggles from Victoria's circle. Through the crack under the door, Marcus could see shadows moving. One figure stood apart from the others, smaller, still like someone trying to become invisible. His mind raced back to Grace's behavior tonight, the fear in her eyes, the bruise on her neck that she'd tried to hide. The woman he was planning to marry had hurt Grace. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Nothing to say? Victoria's voice turned sharp. I asked you a question. Yes, Miss Sterling. Grace's voice was barely audible, stripped of all the warmth and confidence Marcus had come to associate with her. I understand my place. Good. Now get out of here. The adults are talking. Marcus stepped back from the door, his mind reeling. This wasn't the Victoria he knew, or thought he knew. The woman he'd fallen for had been kind, gracious, interested in his philanthropic work. She'd spoken passionately about equality and social justice at dinner parties, donated generously to causes supporting underprivileged communities. How could this be the same person? But even as he struggled with disbelief, memories began surfacing, moments he'd dismissed or rationalized away. The way Victoria's smile sometimes faltered when she thought no one was looking. How she'd grown cooler toward him whenever he spent time talking with staff members. Her subtle suggestions that he replace various household employees with more professional alternatives, which he now realized had all targeted his Black and Latino staff members. The door opened, and Grace emerged, her head down, shoulders curved inward as if trying to make herself smaller. When she saw Marcus standing there, her eyes widened in panic. "Mr. Hartwell, I was just—" "Grace." His voice was gentler than it had ever been. "Are you all right?" For a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped. He saw exhaustion, pain, and something that broke his heart: shame. Not shame for anything she'd done, but the deep, soul-crushing shame of someone who'd been systematically broken down and made to believe they deserved it. "I'm fine, sir," she whispered, but tears were gathering in her eyes. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She hurried past him, practically fleeing toward the servants' stairs. Marcus watched her go, his chest tight with a fury he hadn't felt since he was a child watching bullies terrorize smaller kids on the playground. But this was worse. This was the woman he loved destroying someone under his own roof, in his own home. As Grace disappeared around the corner, Marcus thought about what he really knew about her. She'd come to him through an agency, with impeccable references and a quiet dignity that had impressed him immediately. She worked harder than anyone had a right to expect, often staying late to ensure everything was perfect. She never complained, never asked for anything beyond her fair wages, never crossed the invisible lines that separated employer from employee. But there were things he'd noticed that spoke to who she really was. The way she'd carefully tended to his grandmother's antique roses when the previous gardener had neglected them. How she'd stayed late the night of his business partner's medical emergency, managing phone calls and coordinating with hospitals without being asked. The gentle way she'd helped Mrs. Henderson when the elderly housekeeper had injured her back, taking on extra duties without complaint. Grace Williams was more than just an employee. She was someone with her own dreams, fears, and dignity. Someone who deserved respect and protection, not whatever Victoria had been doing to her. The sound of laughter from the sitting room brought Marcus back to the present. His fiancée and her friends were still there, probably planning more ways to torment the woman who kept his household running smoothly. The woman who'd been nothing but professional and kind since the day she'd started working for him. Marcus had built his fortune on decisive action, on knowing when a situation required immediate intervention. He'd fired executives for less than what Victoria had done to Grace. He'd ended business partnerships over ethical disagreements that paled in comparison to this cruelty. But Victoria wasn't just a business associate. She was the woman he'd planned to spend his life with, the woman he'd introduced to his friends as his perfect match. In a few hours, he was supposed to announce their engagement to 200 influential people. The invitations had been sent, the champagne ordered, the press alerted. Everything he'd built his relationship on felt like quicksand beneath his feet. "Marcus? Darling, is that you out there?" Victoria's voice called out, sweet as honey now. "Come join us. We're just going over the final details for tonight." He stared at the door, knowing that once he walked through it, there would be no going back. He would have to look into Victoria's eyes knowing what she'd done. He would have to smile and play the role of devoted fiancé while his stomach churned with disgust. But he would also be gathering information, watching her more carefully, understanding exactly who he'd been planning to marry. Marcus Hartwell hadn't survived in the cutthroat world of high finance by making emotional decisions. He'd learned to be strategic, patient, and thorough. If Victoria thought she could abuse people in his home while presenting a false face to him, she was about to learn why Forbes had called him one of the most formidable dealmakers of his generation. Marcus straightened his shoulders and opened the door, his face a mask of pleasant anticipation. "Sorry to keep you waiting, love. I was just handling some business." Victoria rose from her chair like a queen receiving her consort, resplendent in a cream silk dress that probably cost more than Grace made in a month. Her smile was radiant, her blue eyes sparkling with what looked like genuine affection. If he hadn't overheard her moments before, he would never have suspected the cruelty lurking beneath that perfect surface. "You work too hard," she said, reaching up to straighten his tie with manicured fingers. "Tonight is about us, about our future together." "Yes," Marcus agreed, studying her face with new eyes. "I suppose it is." 2 hours later, the Hartwell mansion buzzed with the energy of New York's elite. Crystal glasses clinked against a backdrop of string quartet music, and the air was thick with expensive perfume and the weight of important conversations. Marcus moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations on his impending engagement announcement, while his mind remained laser-focused on Victoria's every interaction. She was magnificent in her element, gracious with the wives, charming with the husbands, effortlessly navigating conversations about art, politics, and philanthropy. Anyone watching would see the perfect society hostess, the ideal partner for a man of his stature. But Marcus now noticed the subtle tells. How her smile tightened when any of the staff approached, the way her fingers drummed impatiently when she had to wait for service, the barely perceptible eye roll when Judge Morrison mentioned his foundation's work with underprivileged youth. "Marcus, my boy." Senator Whitman clapped him on the shoulder, bourbon heavy on his breath. "Heard tonight's the big night. That's a fine woman you've got there." "Thank you, Senator." Marcus's response was automatic, his attention divided between the conversation and scanning the room for Grace. He'd been tracking her movement throughout the evening, noting how she seemed to anticipate Victoria's needs with an almost supernatural awareness. The awareness of someone who'd learned to read danger signs. "She'll make an excellent political wife if you ever decide to throw your hat in the ring," Whitman continued. "Got that perfect combination of beauty and breeding that voters love." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion near the dining room caught his attention. Victoria's voice, sharper than usual, cut through the ambient noise. "Excuse me, Senator." Marcus moved toward the sound, weaving through clusters of guests with growing urgency. What he found made his blood turn to ice. Grace stood frozen in the center of a circle that had formed around her, red wine soaking through her white shirt and dripping onto the Persian rug. In her hands were the broken remains of what had been a crystal wine glass, one of his grandmother's baccarat set, worth more than most people made in a year. Victoria stood opposite her, the picture of horrified innocence, her own wine glass conspicuously empty. But Marcus caught the micro-expression that flashed across her face when she thought no one was looking. Satisfaction, quickly masked by concern. "Oh my goodness, how clumsy of me," Victoria exclaimed, her voice carrying just far enough to draw more attention. "I'm so sorry, everyone. The poor girl just... Well, accidents happen when people are nervous around their betters, don't they?" The assembled guests murmured among themselves, some with sympathy, others with the kind of uncomfortable amusement that came from watching someone else's humiliation. Grace stood perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on the floor, her whole body radiating shame and defeat. But Marcus saw what others missed. The slight tremor in her hands wasn't from nervousness. It was from rage, carefully controlled and pushed down, but rage nonetheless. He also noticed the positioning. Victoria had been standing at an angle that would have made it impossible for Grace to accidentally bump into her glass. This had been deliberate. "It's quite all right," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false magnanimity. "We all make mistakes. Grace, darling, perhaps you should clean this up quickly before it stains permanently? And do be more careful in the future. These glasses are irreplaceable family heirlooms." The cruelty was breathtaking in its subtlety. To anyone not paying close attention, Victoria appeared to be handling an unfortunate accident with grace and understanding. But every word was calculated to maximize Grace's humiliation while maintaining plausible deniability. Marcus watched as Grace knelt to pick up the glass shards with shaking hands, her wine-stained shirt clinging to her frame. The sight of her kneeling while Victoria stood over her like a queen dispensing mercy made something snap inside him. This was his home. Grace was under his protection. And Victoria, the woman he'd planned to marry, was systematically destroying someone who couldn't fight back. "Stop." The word came out quietly, but with an authority that cut through the murmur of conversation like a blade. Grace looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. Victoria turned to him with a puzzled smile, as if she couldn't imagine what might be wrong. "Darling, it's fine. Just a little accident." "I said stop." Marcus stepped forward, his voice carrying the same steel that had cowed boardrooms full of powerful men. The conversation around them died as people sensed the shift in atmosphere. He knelt beside Grace, gently taking the glass fragments from her hands. "Leave this. Someone else will clean it up." "Marcus, really, there's no need to make a fuss," Victoria said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. This wasn't going according to her script. Marcus stood, his full attention focused on Victoria. In the sudden silence, every guest in the immediate area could hear his next words clearly. "You're absolutely right. There's no need to make a fuss over an accident." He paused, letting the word accident hang in the air with all the skepticism he could pack into it. "Especially not when we have such wonderful staff taking care of us tonight." He turned to Grace, who was still on her knees, looking between them with growing confusion and fear. "Grace, please stand up." She rose slowly, her movements careful and uncertain. Marcus could see the questions in her eyes, the fear that this was some new form of humiliation she didn't understand yet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the room with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. "I'd like you all to meet Grace Williams, who manages my household with more skill and dedication than I have any right to expect. Grace, this is Senator Whitman, Judge Morrison, the Ashfords, some of the most influential people in New York." Grace's eyes widened in shock. No one introduced staff to guests at events like this. It simply wasn't done. But Marcus wasn't finished. "Grace has a master's degree in business administration from Columbia," he continued, watching as several guests looked surprised. "She's fluent in 4 languages, has managed international logistics for Fortune 500 companies, and could probably run half the organizations represented in this room better than their current leadership." Victoria's face had gone pale, her composure finally cracking. "Marcus, what are you?" "I'm telling the truth," he said simply. "Something that seems to be in short supply tonight." The tension in the room was palpable now. This wasn't just a social faux pas. This was a public confrontation between one of the city's most powerful couples, and everyone knew it. Marcus turned back to Grace, his expression softening. "Grace, I owe you an apology. You've been working in my home for 3 months, and I've never properly acknowledged your qualifications or your contributions. That changes now." He reached into his jacket pocket, not for the engagement ring that had been waiting there, but for his business card holder. He extracted one of his personal cards and handed it to Grace. "My private number is on there. If anyone, and I mean anyone, treats you with disrespect in my house again, I want to know about it immediately." Grace stared at the card as if it might burn her fingers. Around them, the guests watched with the fascination of people witnessing a car accident in slow motion. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "effective immediately, you're receiving a 50% salary increase and a new title, house manager. You'll report directly to me, and you'll have full authority over household operations and staff scheduling." The silence was deafening. Victoria's friends looked horrified, several of the older society matrons appeared scandalized, and Grace looked like she might faint. But Marcus wasn't done. He turned to face Victoria directly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the cold finality of a judge pronouncing a sentence. "Victoria, we need to talk. Privately. Now." Without waiting for her response, he offered his arm to Grace. "May I escort you to the kitchen? I believe you might want to change your shirt." As they walked away from the stunned crowd, Marcus heard the explosion of whispered conversation behind them. By tomorrow, this story will be all over New York's social circles. His reputation as a predictable member of the elite establishment was about to take a dramatic turn. But as he looked down at Grace, still clutching his business card like a lifeline, her eyes bright with tears she was fighting not to shed, Marcus realized he didn't care about his reputation anymore. Some things were more important than maintaining appearances. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone finally stood up to a bully? What do you think Marcus should do next? Sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one. Tell us in the comments what you would do in his situation. The kitchen had never felt like a sanctuary before, but as Marcus closed the door behind them, shutting out the buzz of shocked conversation from the party, it felt like the only honest place in his entire mansion. Grace stood by the industrial sink, still clutching his business card, her wine-stained shirt a stark reminder of Victoria's cruelty. "Mr. Hartwell, I don't understand what just happened," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant sound of the string quartet. "You didn't have to, You're not just anything, Grace." Marcus leaned against the marble counter, suddenly feeling exhausted. "You're a Columbia MBA working as a housekeeper because the job market is brutal, and you need steady income. You're someone who speaks 4 languages and manages my chaos with more skill than most CEOs manage their companies. And you're someone who's been suffering in silence while I was too blind to see it." Grace's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back all evening. She said if I told anyone, if I complained, she'd make sure I never worked in a decent household again. She knows people, has connections. I couldn't risk. What else did she do to you? Marcus's voice was quiet, but Grace could hear the controlled fury beneath it. She hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty and truth. Finally, she pulled down the collar of her shirt slightly, revealing the full extent of the bruise Marcus had glimpsed earlier. It was worse than he'd imagined. Dark purple fingerprints around her throat, the clear mark of someone grabbing her hard enough to leave lasting damage. This was 3 days ago, Grace said, her voice hollow. She found me arranging flowers in the main sitting room, your grandmother's roses from the garden. She said I was overstepping, that staff shouldn't touch family heirlooms. When I tried to explain that you'd specifically asked me to care for them after the gardener left, Marcus felt his hands clench into fists. The roses had been his grandmother's pride and joy, and Grace had brought them back to life with careful attention and genuine love. He'd specifically praised her for it just last week. She grabbed me, Grace continued, her hand unconsciously moving to her throat. Said that I needed to learn my place before I got ideas above my station. She said she knew about girls like me, who thought they could use their looks and sob stories to manipulate wealthy men. Girls like you. Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. Grace met his eyes, and he saw decades of hurt there, the accumulated weight of 1,000 small cruelties from people who looked at her skin color and made assumptions about her worth, her character, her intentions. She made it very clear that she knew what I was really doing here. Working for a rich, single man, being efficient and helpful. She said she'd been watching me, and that once you were married, she'd make sure everyone understood exactly what kind of person I was. The kitchen door swung open, and Victoria appeared like a storm cloud, her face flushed with anger and champagne. She'd clearly dismissed her friends and come looking for them, ready for a confrontation. "Marcus, what the hell was that performance out there?" she demanded. Then her eyes fell on Grace's exposed bruise. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and Marcus saw satisfaction flicker across her features before she caught herself. "Oh, Grace, you poor thing. That looks terrible. You really should be more careful. Those wine glasses can be so dangerous when they break." The casual lie, delivered with such smooth confidence, made Marcus's stomach turn. Victoria was looking directly at evidence of her own violence and spinning it into another fiction. "Grace was just telling me how she got that bruise," Marcus said conversationally. "Apparently, someone grabbed her throat 3 days ago. Any idea who might have done such a thing?" Victoria's eyes narrowed as she realized the game had changed. "I'm sure I have no idea. Perhaps she should be more careful about the company she keeps outside of work." "The only company Grace keeps outside of work is her night classes at NYU, where she's working on her MBA thesis," Marcus replied. "She's researching workplace harassment and its impact on minority employees in domestic service industries." "Fascinating topic, don't you think?" The color drained from Victoria's face. "Marcus, you're being ridiculous. Whatever story she's told you." "She didn't have to tell me anything," Marcus interrupted. "I heard you with your friends earlier. Every word." The silence that followed was deafening. Grace looked between them like she was watching a tennis match, but her eyes held a growing hope that Marcus found both heartbreaking and inspiring. Victoria's composure cracked completely. "You don't understand what you're throwing away," she hissed. "I'm Victoria Sterling. My family built this city. You can't seriously be choosing some domestic help over me." "Her name is Grace," Marcus said quietly. "And yes, I'm choosing basic human decency over whatever you call this relationship." "This is insane." Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. "She's nobody. She's a servant. She should be grateful for the opportunity to work in a house like this. And if she can't handle a little discipline..." "Discipline?" Marcus's voice cut through her rant like ice. "Is that what you call assault?" "Oh, please. Don't be so dramatic. I barely touched her, and only because she needed to understand boundaries. Some people require a firm hand to keep them in line." Grace made a small sound, almost like a wounded animal. The casual dismissal of her pain, the reduction of her humanity to a management problem, was devastating to witness. Marcus moved to stand beside Grace, a gesture that wasn't lost on Victoria. "Let me make something very clear," he said. "Grace is under my protection. She works in my house, she's earned my respect, and she has my support. Anyone who harms her answers to me." "Your protection?" Victoria laughed, but it sounded shrill and desperate. "Marcus, listen to yourself. You're talking like she's a human being deserving of basic respect?" Marcus finished. "Yes, I am." Victoria's face contorted with rage. "This is about more than respect, isn't it? I see how you're looking at her. My God, Marcus, are you really so pathetic that you'd throw away everything we have for some fantasy about the help?" Grace flinched as if she'd been slapped, and Marcus felt something deadly cold settle in his chest. "You need to leave. Now." "Fine." Victoria spun toward the door, then turned back. "But don't think this is over. When you come to your senses, and you will, Don't expect me to take you back. I have my reputation to think of." She stormed out, leaving Marcus and Grace alone in the sudden quiet of the kitchen. In the distance, they could hear the party continuing, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. "Mr. Hartwell," Grace said softly, "what happens now?" "The party, your engagement, your reputation. We'll all survive," Marcus finished. "The question is, what do you want to happen now?" Grace looked up at him, confusion and hope warring in her expression. "I don't understand." Marcus realized they were standing closer than propriety dictated, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, close enough to catch the faint scent of her perfume beneath the wine stain on her shirt. For the first time in months, he felt truly awake, truly present in his own life. "Grace, in the 3 months you've worked here, you've made this house feel like a home again. You've cared for my grandmother's roses, managed impossible schedules, handled my business associates with grace under pressure, and somehow made everything better just by being here." She stared at him, her lips slightly parted in surprise. "Victoria was right about one thing," Marcus continued. "I have been watching you. Not because I saw you as somehow scheming or manipulative, but because watching you work, watching you care about details that matter to me, seeing your intelligence and strength, it reminded me what genuine character looks like." Marcus. His name was barely a whisper on her lips, the first time she'd ever used it without the formal title. "I know this is complicated," he said. "I know there are power dynamics and social expectations and 100 reasons why this is impossible. But Grace, I need you to know, what I feel for you has nothing to do with your position here and everything to do with who you are." The kitchen door burst open again, and Mrs. Henderson rushed in, her face flushed with excitement and worry. "Mr. Hartwell, the guests are asking about the engagement announcement. Senator Whitman sent me to find you, and Miss Sterling just left in quite a state. She told everyone the wedding was off and that you'd lost your mind over." She stopped abruptly as she noticed the tension between Marcus and Grace. Marcus looked at the elderly housekeeper who'd helped raise him, then at Grace, who was still holding his business card like a talisman. "Mrs. Henderson," he said calmly, "please tell our guests that there will be no engagement announcement tonight. However, there will be another announcement. I'm promoting Grace to house manager, effective immediately, and she'll be overseeing all household operations from now on." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows shot up, but she nodded. "Of course, sir. And the guests? Tell them the truth, that sometimes life gives you unexpected opportunities to do the right thing, and tonight was one of those nights." As Mrs. Henderson hurried back to deliver the news, Marcus turned to Grace one more time. "So," he said, offering her his hand, "ready to face whatever comes next?" Grace looked at his outstretched hand, then up at his face, where she saw nothing but sincerity and hope. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "Together?" she asked. "Together," he confirmed. Outside, they could hear the surprised murmur of voices as Mrs. Henderson delivered the news. By tomorrow, New York society would be buzzing with scandal. Marcus Hartwell had chosen his housekeeper over his fiancée, had publicly humiliated one of the city's most prominent families, and had turned his own engagement party into a statement about social justice and human dignity. But as Grace's fingers intertwined with his, Marcus realized he'd never made a better business decision in his life. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a hurricane. Marcus sat in his study, still wearing yesterday's formal shirt, now wrinkled and wine-stained, scrolling through an endless stream of notifications on his phone. The gossip mills of New York society had worked overtime through the night. "Billionaire chooses housekeeper over heiress," screamed one headline. "Marcus Hartwell's shocking betrayal of high society," declared another. But it was the third headline that made his blood run cold. "Victoria Sterling speaks out. I was protecting him from gold-digging opportunists." The article painted a picture of a concerned fiancé who had tried to warn her beloved about manipulative staff members taking advantage of his generous nature. Victoria had given an exclusive interview to the society pages, complete with tearful photos and quotes about how heartbroken she was to see Marcus deceived by someone who clearly had ulterior motives. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Grace appeared in the doorway, wearing a simple black dress instead of her usual uniform, her hair pulled back in a professional bun. She looked exhausted but determined. "The morning papers are here," she said quietly, holding up several folded newspapers. "Mrs. Henderson thought you should see them." "I've already seen enough," Marcus replied, tossing his phone onto the desk. "Victoria's playing this perfectly. cast herself as the victim and you as the villain. Classic manipulation. Grace stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Marcus, maybe she's right. Maybe I should leave. Your reputation. Stop. He stood up, moving around the desk to face her. We've been through this. My reputation will recover. Your safety and dignity are more important than what the social pages think of me. But what if she's not completely wrong? Grace's voice was barely a whisper. What if I did? What if I somehow encouraged the situation without realizing it? Marcus felt his heart break a little at the doubt in her voice. Victoria's poison was still working, making Grace question her own worth, her own innocence in this situation. Grace, look at me. He waited until she raised her eyes to his. You did nothing wrong. You worked with integrity, you treated everyone with respect, and you made my house a home. If developing feelings for someone who embodies those qualities makes me a fool, then I'm proud to be one. Before Grace could respond, Mrs. Henderson burst through the door without knocking, something she hadn't done since Marcus was a teenager. Mr. Hartwell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you both need to see. Her face was pale, her hands shaking slightly as she held up an envelope. This slipped under the service door sometime during the night. Marcus took the envelope, noting that his name was written in block letters across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper and what appeared to be photographs. As he read the typed message, his expression grew increasingly grim. Mr. Hartwell, you deserve to know the truth about the woman you defended last night. Miss Sterling isn't the only victim of your housekeeper's schemes. Check your security cameras from last month, specifically the night of October 15th, around 11 p.m. You might be surprised to see who was really in your study going through your personal files. Some people aren't who they pretend to be. A concerned friend. Marcus looked at the photographs, grainy security footage printouts showing what appeared to be someone in Grace's uniform searching through his desk drawers in his private study. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. on October 15th. Grace gasped, reaching for the photos. Marcus, I swear I would never go through your private things. I don't even clean your study unless you specifically ask me to. I know, Marcus said immediately, but he was studying the photos carefully. Something felt wrong about them, though he couldn't put his finger on what. Mrs. Henderson, do you remember what Grace was doing on the evening of October 15th? The elderly housekeeper thought for a moment. That was the night of your late conference call with the Tokyo investors, wasn't it? Grace stayed until nearly midnight, helping me prepare for the breakfast meeting the next morning. She was in the kitchen with me the entire evening. Marcus felt relief flood through him, but it was quickly replaced by a different kind of concern. If Grace had been in the kitchen with Mrs. Henderson, then who was in his study? And more importantly, who had taken these photographs, and why were they trying to frame Grace? There's something else, Grace said suddenly, her voice tight with realization. October 15th. That was the night Victoria stayed over for the first time. She said she had too much wine at dinner and didn't want to drive home. Marcus's blood chilled as the implications hit him. He moved to his desk and pulled up the security system on his computer, scrolling back to October 15th. The main cameras showed exactly what Mrs. Henderson had described. Grace in the kitchen helping with preparations until well past midnight. But when he checked the study camera, the footage was corrupted. Not missing, not erased, but corrupted, as if someone had deliberately damaged the file to make it unreadable. Someone with access to my house deleted this footage, Marcus said slowly. Someone who knew how to manipulate the system without leaving obvious traces. Victoria's ex-boyfriend was in tech security, Grace said suddenly. She mentioned it once, said he taught her all sorts of tricks about cameras and digital surveillance before they broke up. She bragged about how she could tell if someone was recording her. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Marcus pulled up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found his head of security. James, I need you at the house immediately. Bring your forensics kit and your best digital recovery tools. Someone's been playing games with my security system. While they waited for James to arrive, Marcus found himself pacing the study like a caged animal. Grace sat in the leather chair by the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Mrs. Henderson hovered nearby with the protective instinct of a mother hen. I should have seen this coming, Marcus muttered. Victoria's too smart to leave her cruelty to you as her only play. She needed insurance, a way to destroy your credibility if her treatment of you ever came to light. But why go to such elaborate lengths? Grace asked. I'm nobody. I have no power, no connections. Why not just fire me? Because I was starting to notice you, Marcus realized. She saw how I looked at you, how I treated you differently than other staff. Victoria's not just cruel, she's smart. She knew that if I ever figured out what she was doing to you, I might choose you over her. So she created evidence to destroy that possibility. Mrs. Henderson shook her head in disgust. That woman is pure poison. I never liked her, but I never imagined she was capable of this level of calculation. A sharp knock interrupted them, and James Morrison, Marcus's head of security, entered with a laptop bag and several pieces of technical equipment. He was a former FBI digital forensics specialist who handled security for several high-profile clients. What seems to be the problem, Marcus? Marcus handed him the photographs and explained the situation. James examined the images with a professional eye, then set up his equipment to examine the corrupted security files. These photos have been manipulated, James said after several minutes of analysis. Whoever did this was skilled but not perfect. See the shadow inconsistency here? And the timestamp font is slightly different from your actual security system. Someone used editing software to create these images. He turned to his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. As for your corrupted files, they're not actually corrupted. Someone used a sophisticated program to make them appear damaged while preserving the actual data underneath. Give me a few minutes. The room fell silent except for the sound of James's typing and the occasional beep from his equipment. Grace sat perfectly still, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the armrests of her chair. Got it, James announced finally. The real footage from October 15th, 11:47 p.m. He turned his laptop screen toward them, and Marcus felt his world shift on its axis. The security footage showed his study clearly, but the person searching through his desk wasn't Grace. It was Victoria, wearing what appeared to be a spare housekeeping uniform over her regular clothes. She was methodically going through his files, photographing documents with her phone. But that wasn't the most shocking part. As they watched, Victoria looked directly at the security camera and smiled, a cold, calculating expression that Marcus had never seen on her face before. Then she held up a small device and pointed it at the camera. The footage became staticky and distorted before cutting out entirely. She wanted to be caught on camera, Grace whispered. But she wanted to control what the camera recorded. She created evidence of someone in a housekeeping uniform searching your office, James explained. Then she corrupted the footage and created fake photos to frame Grace. If anyone ever tried to investigate, they'd find the corrupted files and the manipulated images, and assume Grace was guilty. Marcus stared at the screen, watching Victoria's cold smile on repeat. This wasn't the woman he'd fallen in love with, or thought he'd fallen in love with. This was a stranger wearing Victoria's face, someone capable of planning and executing a complex frame-up of an innocent woman. Marcus, Grace said softly, what was she looking for in your files? The question sent another chill through him. Victoria had access to most aspects of his life as his fiancée. What could she have been seeking that she couldn't simply ask for? James was already ahead of them. I can enhance the image, see what files she was photographing. The enhancement took several minutes, but the results were devastating. Victoria had been photographing financial documents, specifically papers related to Marcus's charitable foundation and his plans to establish a scholarship program for underprivileged students. She was looking for ways to redirect the foundation's funding, Marcus realized with growing horror. Victoria had been pushing me to hire her friend's consulting firm to optimize our charitable giving. I thought she was just trying to be helpful. She was planning to embezzle from your charity? Mrs. Henderson gasped. Worse, Marcus said grimly. She was planning to steal money intended for kids who look like Grace. Kids from communities she clearly considers beneath her notice. The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Victoria hadn't just been cruel to Grace out of simple prejudice. She'd been systematically planning to rob a charity that would primarily benefit minority students, all while positioning herself to blame Grace if anyone discovered the theft. Grace stood up suddenly, her face pale but determined. Marcus, you have to turn this evidence over to the authorities. What she planned to do to those students is exactly why I'm going to make sure she faces consequences for every single thing she's done, Marcus finished. To you, to those kids, to everyone she's hurt with her schemes. He looked at James. How long would it take you to compile a complete report on this evidence? Give me a few hours. But Marcus, you should know, this level of premeditation, the financial fraud angle, the assault on Grace with intent to frame her for theft. Victoria Sterling is looking at serious criminal charges if you pursue this. Marcus thought about the woman he'd planned to marry, the life he'd thought he wanted, the reputation he'd built over decades of careful social positioning. Then he looked at Grace, who had survived months of abuse while maintaining her dignity and integrity. He thought about the students who would never receive scholarships because Victoria planned to steal their futures. "Do it," he said without hesitation. "All of it. And James? Make sure the media gets copies of everything. I want the real story told." Grace moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "Are you sure? Once this comes out, there's no going back. Your social circle, your business relationships, everything will change." Marcus looked down at their intertwined fingers, then up at her face, beautiful, strong, honest in a way Victoria had never been. "Grace, everything already changed the moment I heard your truth. The only question now is whether we're brave enough to build something better from the ashes of what I thought my life was supposed to be." Outside, storm clouds were gathering over Manhattan, but for the first time in months, Marcus felt like the sun was finally breaking through. 3 days later, Marcus's world was burning. The story had exploded across every media platform in New York. Billionaire's fiancée caught in elaborate frame-up scheme dominated the headlines, but Victoria Sterling was nothing if not a master strategist. Within hours of James's evidence going public, she had launched a counteroffensive that was as vicious as it was effective. Marcus sat in his lawyer's office, watching the latest news coverage on the wall-mounted television. Victoria appeared on screen, perfectly coiffed and tearfully composed, sitting across from Margaret Chun, the city's most respected investigative journalist. "I'm heartbroken that Marcus would believe such lies about me," Victoria was saying, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "The evidence against me is clearly fabricated. Anyone with technical knowledge could create fake security footage these days. But more than that, I'm concerned about the influence this woman has gained over him." Margaret Chun leaned forward with professional sympathy. "Are you suggesting that Grace Williams has somehow manipulated Mr. Hartwell?" "I'm saying that a vulnerable man, still grieving his grandmother's death, can be easily influenced by someone who knows how to exploit his emotions." Victoria's voice carried just the right note of concern mixed with pain. "Grace is clearly intelligent and calculating. She identified Marcus's soft spots and used them against him." Marcus felt his lawyer, David Reeves, tense beside him. On screen, Victoria was painting a picture of a lonely billionaire seduced by a cunning servant who had turned him against his loving fiancée. It was masterfully done, playing into every stereotype and prejudice her audience held. "The charity allegations are particularly hurtful," Victoria continued. "I've dedicated my life to philanthropic causes. The idea that I would steal from underprivileged children is monstrous. But it's exactly the kind of accusation someone would make if they wanted to destroy my reputation and isolate Marcus from his support system." "Turn it off," Marcus said quietly. David clicked the remote, but the damage was already done. Victoria's interview had aired on 3 networks and was trending across social media. The narrative was shifting from evil socialite exposed to devoted fiancé betrayed by gold-digging manipulator. "She's good," David admitted grudgingly. "Evil but good. She's managed to make herself the victim while positioning Grace as the real villain. And Marcus, I have to tell you, some people are buying it." Marcus's phone buzzed with another text. He'd been getting them all day, friends, business associates, board members, all expressing concern about his recent decisions. Senator Whitman had been particularly blunt. "Marcus, whatever this woman has done to you, it's not too late to fix this. Victoria Sterling comes from good stock. Don't throw away your future for a temporary infatuation." "It gets worse," David continued, pulling out a thick folder. "Victoria's legal team filed a defamation suit this morning. They're claiming that the security footage is fabricated, that Grace planted evidence in your files, and that you've been systematically deceived. They want $50 million in damages." Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. "Do they have a case?" "In court? Probably not. James's forensic analysis is bulletproof. But in the court of public opinion? They're winning." David leaned back in his chair. "Marcus, I've been your lawyer for 8 years. I've never seen you make a reckless decision. Are you absolutely certain about this course of action?" Before Marcus could answer, his phone rang. Grace's number appeared on the screen, and he answered immediately. "Grace? Are you all right?" Her voice was strained, barely above a whisper. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. I'm at St. Mary's Hospital." Marcus was on his feet instantly. What happened? Are you hurt? I'm okay, but... Marcus, someone tried to run me down in the parking garage of my apartment building. If I hadn't jumped behind a concrete pillar... Her voice broke. I'm coming to get you. No. The sharpness in her voice stopped him cold. Marcus, listen to me. The car that tried to hit me, I got a partial license plate. When the police ran it, they said it was registered to a company called Sterling Enterprises. The blood drained from Marcus's face. Sterling Enterprises was Victoria's family business. There's more, Grace continued. I've been getting calls all day. Anonymous voices telling me to leave town, saying I'm not safe if I stay. And Marcus, someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take anything valuable, but they left. They left photos. What kind of photos? Pictures of me. At work, at school, walking to my car. Some of them are from weeks ago, before any of this started. They've been watching me for a long time. Marcus felt his world tilt. Victoria hadn't just been cruel. She'd been planning something much darker than financial fraud. Grace, where are you exactly? I'm sending James to get you right now. Marcus, no. Don't you see what's happening? She's escalating because she's desperate. If something happens to me now, after all this media attention, who do you think they'll blame? You'll be painted as the obsessed billionaire who got his lover to frame his innocent fiancée, then eliminated her when she became a liability. The diabolic brilliance of it took Marcus's breath away. Victoria was creating a scenario where Grace's death would destroy him completely while making Victoria appear to be a victim of his supposed jealous rage. We're going to the police, Marcus said firmly. We have evidence. Evidence that Victoria's lawyers are claiming is fabricated. Evidence that half of New York society thinks you manufactured to justify choosing me over her. Grace's voice was getting stronger, more determined. Marcus, I can't let her destroy you. I won't be responsible for that. What are you saying? The pause that followed felt like an eternity. I'm leaving New York. Tonight. I have a friend in Seattle who can help me disappear until this blows over. Maybe permanently. Grace, no. It's the only way. With me gone, there's no scandal. You can claim you realized you were being manipulated, make up with Victoria, go back to your life. She wins, but at least you survive. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. I don't want that life without you in it. And I don't want a life where loving you gets you destroyed. Grace's voice was firm now, resolved. Marcus, I need you to promise me something. Don't try to find me. Don't come after me. Let me go. The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone in disbelief, then turned to David. Cancel all my appointments. Get James on the phone. And contact Detective Rodriguez at the NYPD. We need protection for Grace immediately. Marcus, if she's leaving voluntarily. She's not leaving voluntarily. She's being terrorized into running, and I'm not going to let that happen. David stood up, his expression grim. You realize that if you pursue this, if you refuse to let Grace disappear quietly, Victoria will escalate further. She'll destroy your reputation, your business, everything you've built. Are you prepared for that? Marcus thought about the life he'd built, the careful social positioning, the business relationships based on old money connections, the respect he'd earned in circles that valued tradition and continuity above all else. Then he thought about Grace, alone and terrified, running from threats that should never have touched her. David, my reputation means nothing if it's built on accepting that good people get destroyed while evil ones prosper. My business connections mean nothing if they're conditional on staying silent about abuse and fraud. And my social standing means nothing if it requires me to abandon someone I love to save face. His lawyer studied him for a long moment. You know, there's no going back from this decision. There was no going back the moment I heard Victoria threaten Grace in my own home. Marcus grabbed his coat. The question isn't whether I'm prepared to lose everything I've built. The question is whether I'm man enough to build something better. As Marcus headed for the door, David called after him. Where are you going? To find Grace before she disappears forever. And then I'm going to end Victoria Sterling's reign of terror once and for all. The elevator doors closed behind him, and Marcus felt the familiar sensation of falling. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of where he might land. Some things were worth the fall. Outside, the storm that had been threatening finally broke, rain lashing against the windows of the law firm. But Marcus barely noticed the weather as he raced toward what might be the most important decision of his life. In her hospital room across the city, Grace sat on the edge of a narrow bed, staring at a bus ticket to Seattle. Every instinct told her to run, to save Marcus from the destruction Victoria was planning. But her heart was breaking at the thought of never seeing him again. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Smart girl. The 11:30 bus will take you far from here. Take it and everyone stays safe. Refuse and tomorrow's headlines will be very different. Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. Sometimes love meant walking away. Sometimes it meant staying and fighting. She looked at the bus ticket again, then at the clock on the wall. 10:47 p.m. 43 minutes to decide whether love was worth the risk of everything. Marcus's Bentley cut through the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan like a knife, James at the wheel while Marcus worked his phone frantically in the back seat. Every call to Grace went straight to voicemail. Every text remained unread. She was shutting him out, preparing to disappear, and he was running out of time. St. Mary's Hospital, sir, James announced as they pulled into the parking garage. But I should mention, there are news vans outside the main entrance. Marcus cursed under his breath. Victoria's media machine was in full swing, and Grace was trapped in the center of it all. He pulled up the hood of his jacket and headed for the service entrance, moving with the determination of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. Room 314 was quiet when he arrived, but not empty. Grace sat on the hospital bed, still in her torn clothes from the parking garage incident, holding a bus ticket in her trembling hands. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears she'd been fighting to hold back. I told you not to come, she whispered. And I told you that you're under my protection. Marcus closed the door behind him and moved to her side. Grace, you can't run from this. Victoria won't stop just because you're gone. She'll find another way to hurt you, to hurt everyone who matters to me. Grace held up the bus ticket. Look at what loving you has cost already. Your reputation, your business relationships, your whole life is falling apart because of me. No. Marcus sat beside her on the narrow hospital bed, his voice gentle but firm. My life was falling apart because I was living a lie. Victoria showed me that. You showed me what truth looks like. Marcus, be realistic. I'm a housekeeper with student loans and a night job. You're one of the most powerful men in New York. Even if we get through this, what kind of future could we possibly have together? Before Marcus could answer, his phone buzzed. James's number appeared on the screen. Sir, you need to see something. I'm sending you a video file. It just came in through our tip line. Marcus opened the attachment, and Grace leaned in to watch. The video was clearly shot on a phone, shaky and low resolution, but the content made both of them gasp. It showed Victoria in what appeared to be a restaurant, but she wasn't alone. Across from her sat a man Marcus recognized as Tony Ricci, a private investigator with a reputation for operating in legal gray areas. The audio was muffled, but certain phrases were clear enough to understand. Need her completely discredited, Victoria was saying. Financial records, personal history, anything that makes her look like a con artist. What about the physical stuff? Ricci's gravelly voice was unmistakable. The parking garage thing rattled her, but she's still here. Victoria's laugh was ice cold. Oh, I have plans for that. By tomorrow night, Grace Williams will be yesterday's news, one way or another. The video ended abruptly, but Marcus's phone immediately rang again. James's voice was excited. Sir, the woman who sent this is in the lobby. Says she's Victoria's former personal assistant, Elena Rodriguez. She wants to talk to you and Grace immediately. Send her up. Within minutes, a young Latina woman in her 20s appeared at the door. She was nervous but determined, clutching a manila envelope and a recording device. Ms. Rodriguez, Marcus said. Thank you for coming forward. I couldn't stay silent anymore, Elena said, her accent thick with emotion. Ms. Sterling, she fired me last week when I questioned some of her activities. But I kept recordings of our conversations as protection. She opened the envelope and spread out a collection of documents and photographs. She's been planning this for months. Not just the thing with Grace, the whole thing. She never loved you, Mr. Hartwell. She called you a useful idiot who would give her access to real money and power. Grace made a small sound of pain, and Marcus felt his last illusions about Victoria crumble. Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. She hired Tony Ricci to investigate everyone in your household, looking for weaknesses. When she found out Grace had a criminal record. I don't have a criminal record, Grace interrupted. Exactly. But Victoria was planning to create one. Planted evidence, false witnesses, whatever it took. She said she needed Grace to look like a convicted thief before she could. Elena's voice trailed off. Before she could, what? Marcus demanded. Elena met his eyes, her expression grave. Before she could arrange Grace's suicide. Make it look like Grace couldn't handle being exposed as a fraud and took her own life. Victoria called it tying up loose ends. The room fell into horrified silence. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as the full scope of Victoria's plan became clear. This wasn't just about money or social position. Victoria was planning murder. Grace stood up abruptly, her face pale but resolute. Then we end this tonight. Grace, no, Marcus started, but she held up her hand. No more running. No more hiding. Victoria thinks she can terrorize me into disappearing, or worse. She's about to learn what happens when you corner someone who has nothing left to lose. Elena looked between them, then pulled out her recording device. There's more. Victoria doesn't know I recorded our last conversation. She laid out her entire plan. The fake evidence, the media manipulation, even her arrangement with Ricci for the final stage. She pressed play, and Victoria's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. By Sunday, Grace Williams will be dead, Marcus will be broken, and I'll be the grieving fiancé who helps him rebuild his life. It's almost poetic, really. Marcus felt a cold fury settle in his chest, not the hot anger of the past few days, but something deeper and more dangerous. Victoria had miscalculated. She'd assumed he was weak, that his privileged upbringing had made him soft. She'd forgotten that his fortune hadn't been inherited. He'd built it from nothing by being more ruthless and strategic than anyone expected. Elena, he said quietly, are you willing to testify to what you've told us? Yes, sir. I have copies of everything, documents, recordings, emails. Victoria kept me close because she thought I was too scared to ever speak up. Marcus turned to Grace. And you? Are you ready to fight instead of run? Grace looked at the bus ticket in her hand, then deliberately tore it in half. I've been ready. I was just trying to protect you from the consequences. The only consequence I can't live with is losing you. Marcus took her hands in his. Grace, I love you. Not because you're convenient or safe or socially appropriate, but because you're brave and kind and real in a world full of people like Victoria. I love you enough to burn down everything I've built if that's what it takes to keep you safe. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears now, not of despair but of hope. I love you too, which is why I'm not going to let her win. Marcus's phone buzzed again. James's voice was urgent when he answered. Sir, Detective Rodriguez is here with a warrant for Victoria's arrest. Elena's evidence was enough for conspiracy and attempted murder charges. But there's a problem, Victoria's gone. She left her apartment hours ago, and no one knows where she is. Marcus looked at Grace, then at Elena, then at the clock on the wall. 11:15 p.m. James, I know exactly where she is. Victoria's too arrogant to run. She's going to try to finish this tonight. Meet us at the Port Authority bus terminal. And James, bring backup. This ends now. As they prepared to leave, Grace caught Marcus's arm. Are you sure about this? Once we walk out that door, there's no going back to your old life. Marcus looked at the woman who had shown him what real love looked like, who had suffered Victoria's cruelty in silence to protect him, who was now ready to stand and fight despite everything she'd endured. Grace, my old life was a prison I didn't even know I was in. You didn't just show me the way out, you showed me what freedom looks like. They walked out of the hospital together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever Victoria had planned. For the first time in days, Marcus felt hope rising in his chest. Victoria Sterling had made one critical mistake in all her careful planning. She'd underestimated what two people could accomplish when they stopped running and started fighting for each other. Port Authority at midnight was a maze of shadows and fluorescent lights, filled with late-night travelers and the desperate energy of people running toward or away from their problems. Marcus, Grace, and Elena moved through the terminal like hunters tracking dangerous prey, while James coordinated with Detective Rodriguez and two unmarked police units positioned at the exits. Gate 47, Grace said, checking her phone. That's where the Seattle bus boards. If Victoria's planning to intercept me, she'll want witnesses, Marcus realized. Public place, security cameras, plenty of people to see the tragic accident or emotional breakdown she orchestrated. They found Victoria exactly where Marcus had predicted, near Gate 47, but not alone. Tony Ricci stood beside her, along with two men Marcus didn't recognize. All three were watching the boarding area with the focused attention of predators waiting for prey. But Victoria had made another miscalculation. She was dressed for the cameras, wearing designer clothes and perfect makeup, ready to play the role of a concerned ex-fiancée trying to save an unstable woman from herself. She looked like she was attending a charity gala, not planning a murder. "There," Elena whispered, pointing to a news crew setting up equipment near the information desk. "She called them, didn't she? She wants this filmed." Marcus felt the final pieces of Victoria's plan click into place. Grace would board the bus, Ricci would create some kind of incident, and Victoria would rush in to help, all caught on camera. Whatever happened next would be edited and spun to make Victoria look like a hero and Grace like a dangerous, unstable woman who had finally snapped. "Detective Rodriguez," Marcus spoke into his earpiece. "Are you in position?" "Affirmative. We have eyes on all subjects. Waiting for your signal." Marcus turned to Grace and Elena. "Remember, we need her to incriminate herself on camera. Elena, your recording device is running." Elena patted the small device clipped to her jacket. "Everything will be captured." "Grace," Marcus took her hands, looking into her eyes one last time. "Are you ready for this?" She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I'm not the same scared woman who was hiding bruises 3 days ago. Victoria created a monster when she thought she was breaking me." Marcus kissed her forehead gently. "Then let's end this." Grace walked toward gate 47 alone, her movements deliberately nervous and uncertain. She carried a small duffel bag and kept checking over her shoulder, playing the part of a woman trying to escape. As she approached the boarding area, Victoria's head snapped up with predatory alertness. "Grace!" Victoria's voice carried across the terminal, pitched perfectly to sound concerned and loving. "Grace, wait." She hurried toward Grace with her arms outstretched, the picture of a worried friend trying to help. The news cameras immediately swiveled to follow the action, and several passengers turned to watch the unfolding drama. "Victoria," Grace said, backing away. "Leave me alone. You've done enough." "Sweetheart, I know you're confused and scared," Victoria said, her voice loud enough for the cameras to pick up. "Marcus told me about your breakdown, about the things you've been saying, the delusions you've been having. I'm here to help you." It was masterfully done. Victoria was positioning Grace as mentally unstable while casting herself as the compassionate woman trying to save her rival from self-destruction. "I'm not having delusions," Grace said, her voice shaking. Whether from genuine fear or perfect acting, Marcus couldn't tell. "You hurt me. You threatened me. You tried to frame me for theft." Victoria's expression was all sympathetic concern. "Oh, honey, that's the paranoia talking. You've been under so much stress, working so hard to impress Marcus. It's understandable that you might misinterpret things." From his position near the coffee shop, Marcus watched Victoria work with grudging admiration. Even knowing her true nature, he could see how convincing she was. To anyone watching, Grace looked like a disturbed woman making wild accusations against a patient, caring friend. But Victoria's confidence was about to become her downfall. "Grace," Victoria continued, moving closer, "I know about the money you took from Marcus's office. I know about the files you copied, the information you've been selling to his competitors." Grace's eyes widened in genuine shock. "What are you talking about? I never." "It's okay," Victoria said soothingly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mental illness can make people do things they normally wouldn't do. That's why I hired Mr. Ricci here," she gestured to Tony, who stepped forward on cue, "to help you get the psychiatric care you need before you hurt yourself or someone else." This was it. The moment Victoria revealed her hand completely. She was publicly accusing Grace of theft and mental illness while positioning Ricci as some kind of medical intervention specialist. Whatever happened next would be painted as Grace's violent reaction to being offered help. But Grace didn't break down. Instead, she smiled. "That's interesting, Victoria, because I never worked in Marcus's office. I was never allowed access to his files. So how exactly did I steal information from places I've never been?" Victoria's confident expression flickered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "You're not thinking clearly, Grace. You've been in his office dozens of times." "Actually, I haven't." Grace's voice grew stronger, more assured. "I have witnesses who can verify that I've never been in Marcus's private office alone. But you know who has been there? You. And you know who was caught on a security camera going through his files? Also you." The color began draining from Victoria's face as she realized Grace wasn't playing the broken victim anymore. "And you know what else is interesting?" Grace continued, her voice now carrying clearly to the watching crowd and cameras. "You just admitted to hiring Tony Ricci. That's fascinating, because Mr. Ricci is currently under investigation for stalking, intimidation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Victoria looked around wildly, suddenly aware that the scene wasn't going according to her script. The news cameras were still rolling, capturing every word, but now she was the one being exposed instead of Grace. "You're lying," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its confident tone. "You're making this up because you're desperate." "Am I?" Grace pulled out her phone and held it up so the cameras could see the screen. "Because I have recordings of you planning this entire thing." Your voice, Victoria, describing exactly how you plan to frame me, humiliate me, and ultimately. She paused, letting the silence build. "Kill me." The terminal around them had gone completely silent. Even the background noise of announcements and late-night travelers seemed to fade as everyone within earshot strained to hear what would happen next. Victoria's mask finally shattered completely. The sympathetic concern vanished, replaced by cold fury that transformed her beautiful features into something ugly and dangerous. "You little bitch," she hissed, lunging toward Grace. "You think you can destroy me? I am Victoria Sterling. My family built this city. You're nothing. Less than nothing." But Grace was ready for her. As Victoria reached for her, Grace stepped aside smoothly, and Victoria stumbled forward into the arms of Detective Rodriguez, who had appeared as if from nowhere. "Victoria Sterling," Detective Rodriguez announced loudly, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, stalking, and fraud." The news cameras captured everything. Victoria's shocked face, the handcuffs clicking into place, her desperate attempts to maintain her composure as the reality of her situation crashed down around her. "This is insane," Victoria screamed as Detective Rodriguez read her rights. "I'm the victim here. That woman seduced my fiancé and turned him against me. She's destroyed my life." But her protests fell on deaf ears. The evidence was overwhelming, the recordings were clear, and her own actions in the terminal had provided the final confirmation of her guilt. As Victoria was led away, still screaming about injustice and conspiracies, Marcus stepped out of the shadows where he'd been waiting. Grace turned toward him, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the crowded terminal. Then Grace smiled. Not the careful, professional expression she'd worn as his housekeeper, not the fearful, broken look from the past few days, but a radiant smile of pure triumph and relief. "It's over," she said as Marcus reached her side. "No," Marcus replied, taking her in his arms as cameras flashed around them and the crowd began to disperse. "It's just beginning." Elena approached them, grinning broadly. "Did you get all of that?" Marcus asked her. "Every word," Elena confirmed, holding up her recording device. Victoria Sterling just confessed to conspiracy and attempted murder on live television. I don't think even her family's lawyers can spin their way out of this one. As they walked through the terminal together, Marcus, Grace, and Elena, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Complete certainty about his choices. The old world of careful social positioning and strategic relationships was behind him now. Ahead lay something entirely new and infinitely better. "So what happens now?" Grace asked as they stepped out into the New York night. Marcus looked at the woman who had shown him what real love looked like, who had faced down a sociopathic killer with nothing but courage and intelligence, who had just destroyed the most dangerous person in his life while the cameras rolled. "Now," he said, "we build something better." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same blue sitting room where he'd first overheard Victoria's cruelty, but everything had changed. The space that had once felt suffocating with secrets and lies now glowed with warm afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that Grace had convinced him to leave uncurtained. "The flowers look beautiful," Grace said, entering the room with a tray of tea. She moved with the same graceful efficiency she'd always possessed, but there was a lightness to her steps now, a joy that hadn't been there during her months of hiding fear and pain. Marcus looked at his grandmother's roses, arranged in crystal vases throughout the room. Grace had not only saved them from neglect, she'd helped them flourish beyond anything his grandmother had achieved. The metaphor wasn't lost on him. "The Times article comes out tomorrow," he said, accepting a cup of tea from her hands that no longer trembled when she served him, because she no longer served him. Grace was now his partner in every sense of the word. "Are you nervous?" she asked, settling beside him on the sofa that had once been Victoria's favorite spot. Marcus considered the question. Tomorrow's New York Times would publish the definitive account of the Victoria Sterling scandal, based on months of investigative journalism. Elena Rodriguez had become the paper's star source, providing not just recordings and documents, but insights into the systematic cruelty that Victoria had practiced throughout her privileged life. The article would reveal that Grace had been only the latest in a long line of victims: housekeepers, assistants, drivers, and service workers who had suffered Victoria's abuse in silence. It would detail the charity fraud scheme that would have robbed thousands of underprivileged students of their futures. And it would document Victoria's escalating violence, culminating in the attempted murder plot that had finally brought her down. "Not nervous," Marcus said finally. "Ready." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and social upheaval. Victoria's trial had been front-page news for weeks, featuring a parade of witnesses who testified to her pattern of abuse and manipulation. She'd been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 7 years. But the trial had been only part of the story. Marcus had faced his own reckoning with the social circles that had enabled Victoria's behavior through willful blindness and class solidarity. Several board positions had been revoked, charity invitations withdrawn, and old friendships ended when he refused to minimize Victoria's crimes or apologize for his choice to support her victim. "Any regrets?" Grace asked, as if reading his thoughts. Marcus looked around the room where they'd shared morning tea every day for the past 6 months. Not as employer and employee, but as partners planning their shared future. Grace had finished her MBA thesis on workplace harassment, dedicating it to all the women who refused to stay silent. Graduated summa cum laude, and accepted a position as director of Marcus's expanded charitable foundation. Together, they'd restructured the foundation to focus specifically on supporting victims of workplace abuse and providing educational opportunities for underprivileged students. The same students Victoria had planned to rob. The irony was perfect. Victoria's evil had directly led to exponentially more good being done in the world. "My only regret," Marcus said, reaching for Grace's hand, "is that I didn't see Victoria's true nature sooner. That I let her hurt you for as long as she did." Grace squeezed his fingers gently. "Marcus, we've talked about this. You can't blame yourself for not seeing through someone who'd spent her whole life perfecting deception." She was right, of course. The investigation had revealed that Victoria had been manipulating and abusing people since childhood, always careful to target those who couldn't fight back, always maintaining her perfect public image while destroying lives in private. Marcus had been simply her most ambitious mark, a billionaire who could give her access to unlimited resources and ultimate social power. "Besides," Grace continued with a smile that made Marcus's heart skip, "if you'd figured it out earlier, we might never have fallen in love." It was true. Their relationship had been forged in the crucible of Victoria's cruelty, strengthened by shared adversity and mutual protection. What had begun as Marcus's instinct to defend someone under his care had evolved into the deepest love he'd ever experienced. The doorbell chimed, and Mrs. Henderson's voice echoed from the foyer. "Mr. Hartwell, Ms. Williams, your guests are arriving." Marcus and Grace exchanged glances. Today was the 6-month anniversary of Victoria's arrest, and they were hosting a dinner party, but not the kind of sterile social gathering that had once filled this house. Their guests included Elena Rodriguez, who had become a close friend and was now working as an investigative journalist specializing in corporate fraud. Detective Rodriguez and his wife. James and his family. Mrs. Henderson, of course, and several other household staff members who had become part of their extended family. But the guest Marcus was most excited to see was Dr. Patricia Williams, Grace's mother, who was flying in from Chicago to meet the man who had fallen in love with her daughter. "Are you ready for this?" Grace asked, straightening his tie with the same gesture Victoria had once used, but with completely different intent. Where Victoria's touch had been possessive and controlling, Grace's was loving and supportive. "I've been ready since the moment I realized what you mean to me," Marcus replied. They walked to the foyer together, where Dr. Williams was just arriving. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, with Grace's warm eyes and the same quiet strength that had first attracted Marcus to her daughter. Behind her came Elena, Detective Rodriguez, and the rest of their chosen family. People who valued character over pedigree, honesty over social status. "Mom," Grace said, embracing her mother warmly, "I'd like you to meet Marcus." Dr. Williams studied Marcus with the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent years reading people's true character. As the head of emergency medicine at Chicago General, she'd learned to assess situations quickly and accurately. "So you're the man who chose my daughter over one of New York's most eligible socialites," she said. I'm the man who was lucky enough to have your daughter choose me back, Marcus replied. Dr. Williams smiled, the same radiant expression that lit up Grace's face when she was truly happy. I think we're going to get along just fine. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself watching the interactions around his dinner table with wonder. These people, Elena with her fierce loyalty and street-smart intelligence, Detective Rodriguez with his dry humor and unshakable integrity, Mrs. Henderson with her maternal warmth, Dr. Williams with her no-nonsense wisdom, represented everything Victoria had dismissed as beneath her notice. But they were also everything Marcus had been missing in his old life. Authenticity, genuine friendship, love based on mutual respect rather than social convenience. A toast, Dr. Williams announced as they reached the dessert course. To my daughter, who showed a powerful man what real strength looks like. To Marcus, who proved that love is more important than reputation. And to all of you, who stood by them when it would have been easier to look the other way. To new beginnings, Marcus added, raising his glass. To love winning over evil, Grace said. To family, Elena chimed in, the kind you choose for yourself. As they touched glasses around the table, Marcus felt a completeness he'd never known existed. His old life had been a carefully constructed performance, every relationship calculated for maximum social and business advantage. This life, messy, unpredictable, built on genuine connection rather than strategic positioning, was everything he'd never known he wanted. Later, after the guests had gone home and Mrs. Henderson had finished cleaning up, Marcus and Grace walked through the garden where his grandmother's roses bloomed in abundance. The evening air was warm, filled with the scent of flowers and the distant sounds of the city beyond the mansion walls. I've been thinking, Grace said as they stopped beside the fountain where Marcus had first realized he was falling in love with her. About that job offer from the United Nations. The position heading their new anti-trafficking initiative. Marcus felt his heart skip. Grace had been offered the position 2 weeks ago, an incredible opportunity that would take her around the world, fighting injustice on a global scale. It was perfect for her skills, her passion, and her desire to help people who couldn't help themselves. It would also mean leaving New York. Leaving him. It's an amazing opportunity, he said carefully. You'd be incredible at it. Grace turned to face him fully, her expression serious. It would mean traveling constantly, based in Geneva, but working in dozens of countries. It would be complicated for us. Marcus took her hands, looking into the eyes that had become his anchor in a world that no longer made sense without her in it. Grace, I love you enough to support whatever decision makes you happiest. If this is your calling. It's not, she interrupted softly. My calling is right here. Building something meaningful with you. The foundation work we're doing, the lives we're changing together. This is where I belong. Are you sure? I don't want you to give up your dreams for me. Grace smiled, the expression that never failed to make Marcus feel like the luckiest man alive. Marcus, you are my dream. This life we're building, this love we've found, it's better than anything I imagined possible. She paused, then pulled a small velvet box from her pocket. Marcus's eyes widened in shock. Grace, what? 6 months ago, you risked everything to protect me, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. You gave up your old life, faced down a sociopath, and showed me what real love looks like. Now I want to ask you something. She dropped to one knee beside the fountain, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band. Marcus Hartwell, will you marry me? For a moment, Marcus was too stunned to speak. In all his imagined futures, he'd never pictured this. Grace taking the lead, Grace making the grand gesture, Grace offering him the future he'd dreamed of but never dared to hope for. Grace Williams, he said, dropping to his knees beside her so they were eye to eye. I would be honored to be your husband. As he slipped the ring onto his finger, Marcus realized that this was what victory looked like. Not the defeat of an enemy, but the triumph of love over fear, truth over lies, justice over cruelty. 6 months ago, he'd been living a lie, engaged to a woman who saw him as a stepping stone to power. Tonight, he was engaged to a woman who saw him as a partner in building something beautiful and meaningful. The transformation was complete. Marcus Hartwell, former prisoner of social expectations, was finally truly free. And as Grace kissed him beneath the stars in the garden where his grandmother's roses bloomed with unprecedented beauty, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that some stories really do have happily ever after endings. They just require the courage to fight for them. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the smallest acts of courage. like standing up for what's right when everyone else looks away. What moment in your life required you to choose between what was easy and what was right? Share your story in the comments below. Your courage might inspire someone else to find theirs. This story reminds us that love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about becoming the right person. Marcus and Grace's journey shows us that real strength comes not from power or position, but from the willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In a world that often rewards cruelty and selfishness, their story is a beacon of hope. Good can triumph over evil, love can conquer hate, and sometimes the most important choice we make is simply to care about someone else's pain as much as our own. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.